Am I a hero?
Am I a hero?
We're here to challenge your definition of a hero. Welcome to episode 6 of our podcast, 10,000 Heroes. I'm Ankur Shah, and I'm here with my co-host, Nathan Ramos. Nate, today you had an interview with Rick Jarow?
Rick Jarow, that's right. Yeah, it's a great conversation. It's very wide-ranging. And I'll just say this. I want to give this little note to our readers. You know, if some of these ideas might seem a little far out, to stick with it, because I think what Rick is pointing at here is something actually very practical that we can all implement in our lives. This connection to aesthetic is something that we circle back to many times over the course of the conversation, but allowing beauty to carry us into our vocation, our attraction to something. And so from that, I think people can take away something very practical from this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot in it about the beauty of being present that we got to.
Yeah.
But before he gets to that, there's a lot of other stuff. And one thing I wanted to highlight, I really enjoyed, was how much he seems to be challenging us. And since I wasn't there, it's particularly challenging you. You know,
Yeah.
he's talking about, I mean, he must know that you run a group coaching program, and he's dissing the 10 steps to success, talking about
Yeah.
how no one gives seminars on how to be a follower, only seminars
That's
on how to
right.
be a leader, dissing
That's
the whole
right.
concept of a podcast on heroism. And I just,
Yeah.
I really loved all of those moments.
Me too. And I enjoyed it. And we're here for that. I want to be challenged. And I think we get to a place where we're really sort of on the same page with that, because, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but our project in Momentum Lab and with this podcast isn't any sort of one path to success or defining success for people. And I think we get there by the end of the conversation. So,
Oh yeah, totally. It's lovely. And I just love how he keeps coming back to divine play. He's clearly not taking us seriously or taking himself seriously. And for me, that's like the true hallmark of a master. And one more thing I just want to say, because I enjoyed it so much, is I just love his like professorial vibe, where
That's right.
he's defining, he's going back to the origin in the Sanskrit and in the Latin of these terms and evoking the original meanings and doing so much great storytelling. Like I love how he
Yeah.
brings in the Parsifal myth and just the thing, you know, with the ancient Indian legends. And I there's a lot of great stuff in there.
Great. Well, I'm excited for people to listen. So let's jump right in. Oftentimes, I think people start these sort of conversations, they go back to the beginning and work their way forward, but I thought we'd do the opposite.
Good.
And
I like that.
we could just start right where you're at. And I know you have a book coming out this summer, and this is a bit of an academic project, but I thought we could start there to sort of tease out where you're at, what you're working on, and maybe what you're doing next.
All right. Well, I am doing something next, but let's start with the book that's coming out is titled The Cloud of Longing. And it is a translation and discussion of the Shakespeare of India, Kalidasa, who probably wrote in the 4th century. And it's a poem about a lovelorn, semi-divine being known as a yaksha, who is in exile from his beloved, and he's on a mountain pining away. He's cursed for a year. And he spies a cloud in the sky. And he starts talking to the cloud, asking the cloud to deliver a message to his beloved. And the poem is his telling the cloud where to go and what to do. And it takes one over the imagined landscape of India. And aside from being breathtakingly beautiful, what is striking and what has struck me about it is the melange of language, love, and nature. In the West, particularly the contemporary, modern, postmodern, there is this sense that language is something different from nature. just like the sense that the belief that human is different than nature.
Hmm.
But in the Megadutam, or the cloud messenger, the poem, it demonstrates this amazing intertwining of nature, feeling, form, quest, all rolled into one beautiful narrative. I remember way back before the 4th century, in the 1970s, there were these channeled books called Seth Speaks. And I remember the one thing I recall from that is Seth talking about how the weather is actually resonant with emotion. Like the weather is like the emotion of the planet. So this work of Kalidasa captured my imagination because I think it's offering new ways, even though it's an old, new for us, of looking at and understanding this thing that is called the natural world. That's the payoff for me. And unlike environmentalists who tend, at least in my part of the world, they tend to fall in with either the sciences or some political agenda. And what is often left out of the equation is the aesthetic of the environment and how important that is. That it is the beauty itself, which is missing from a lot of the equations. So I worked on that for many years, not because it was, it's many years work, but also because my Sanskrit isn't great, so I needed to work doubly hard to make it, because it's a very difficult text. The other thing that this text highlights, again, is I call it the aesthetic darshan, or the power of beauty, and how beauty, particularly resonant language, really can get shortchanged. Yeah.
That you brought all that together so nicely. So you started out by pointing out language, love, and nature, and I was wondering where love was going to work its way in.
Yeah.
But somehow in this aesthetic darshan, maybe we could stop and define that term for the listeners.
Well,
What's a
darshan,
darshan? What does that mean?
darshan is an all-purpose classical Indian term that it comes from the verbal root drish, which means to see. So when you go meet somebody, you say you're having their darshan. When you
So
go
maybe
with a
an
holy
encounter.
person, you have an encounter. Yeah, so you can have an encounter with a human, with a god, with a divinity in a temple, or with a tree. But the thing about the darshan is not only are you seeing them, but they're seeing you. So I like the word encounter.
Yeah, interesting. I love what you're putting your finger on here because I guess is this accurate? You think that sort of the realm of aesthetics kind of takes on a frivolous dimension for us in the West? Something extra or accessory or
Yeah, I would just look when you grow up in the public schools. Music and art are kind of side. The real stuff is reading,
yeah,
math, any music
right.
and art. If you have time, will do
Yeah,
that. So maybe not frivolous, but certainly not central.
yeah.
And even in spirituality, there's often a sense of um, you know let's get down to the real nitty gritty, which is knowledge, and all the fluff is the singing and the flowers. But the aesthetic darshan is quite. It includes the power of language And this is dramatically different than certain other forms of spiritual awareness, some Buddhist, some Gnostic, which basically say that language can never bridge the gulf of duality. Therefore, if you want to be in truth, you have to be silent.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this tradition of silence, which points out like the finger that points to the moon is not the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But the aesthetic tradition says, yes, the finger that points to the moon is not the moon, but you can, there's a way to amplify language that it can bring the moon into your consciousness. But it's not
Mm-hmm.
direct, it's indirect.
Mm-hmm. So I would say these traditions are alive in the West. Maybe they're just a little neglected. I mean, would you say sort of the transcendental poets and even
Well,
just the
even transcendental is a problem because
yeah.
this is the whole, I think, thrust of a lot of environmental movement, that the transcendental vision often seeks to escape this realm for another one, the greater one.
Mm-hmm.
So the traditions that seem to be championing aesthetics are feminist, mother goddess traditions. Even in India, in the Shakta or Shakti tradition of the divine feminine, they say that the goddess gives you both bhukti and mukti. Mukti being freedom, liberation from all bonds of illusion, but also bhukti, enjoyment of the world. They're not seen as opposed to one another, because how could the goddess deny her children anything? The trick is that you know where it's coming from. You don't think I did this, I made this, but it's all grace. So the person, I feel, one of the traditions that has tried to reconnect the aesthetic dimension, I would start with James Hillman, who was working with Renaissance and Greek thinkers, and people like Abrams, Spell of the Sensuous. They're
I was just thinking
derivative.
of that immediately.
They're
Yeah.
coming from that place. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not just it's everywhere. It's we've gone. The patriarchal consciousness has championed transcendence for so many thousands of years, and it's left people pretty high, dry, and lonely. And the matriarchal consciousness, which arguably preceded the patriarchy, you had this, you had the sense of belonging, you had the sense of connection, but it wasn't going anywhere. It was stultified. So, are we moving towards some type of integration possible? That's what kind of interests me.
Mm.
And that is why just, if you don't mind, I'll just introduce what I'm working on now.
Oh, please.
I just finished the first draft yesterday. It's a book, has a cheesy title. It's called working title is called The Teachings of El. Um, Something like advice for staying at home. But long before there was a pandemic, I did a process called Life Between Lives, kind of hypnagogic process of meditative guided imagery and stuff. And I encountered a feminine being who called herself El. I never saw her face. She was just wrapped in a white shawl, but she just came up to me and said very clearly, she said, your job now is to stay home and cook slowly. So I stayed with that. I took that seriously. And for the last 10 years or so, after gallivanting around the world for a good part of this lifetime, I've basically been staying home. And I've been trying to amplify, like, what does it mean to cook slowly? And I thought of Rumi's poem about the chickpea being cooked by God, going, ouch, guys, I'm making you into a beautiful stew for the beloved. But little did I know when this whole thing started that, and you would appreciate this, it actually entailed me becoming a cook and literally cooking for people. But the book is a meditation on being in a house, and Oh, the other thing that Elle said that hooked me, it wasn't just say, she didn't just say your job is to stay home and cook slowly. Then she said, and if you do this, the Mahanirvana Tantra will reveal itself to you. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna, and so it's a very visceral exploration of how doing the dishes and taking out the garbage and sweeping the floor and fixing the shelf and all the stuff is non-different than sitting on a meditation cushion. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Rick, I want to ask then. I just see a very natural bridge between the two projects, which is there's this man sitting on a hill, proclaiming poetry to a cloud or commanding a cloud, and from this you've derived the this language, love, and nature. And now this new journey is just a man standing at his stove.
Right. Yeah.
What's the connection, and how does this idea of the aesthetic darshan, how does that show up in your kitchen or in your garden?
Well, I will first know you're working on this word of this thing of the heroic.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to
Yep.
frame in those terms that,
Sure.
and I don't want to be, but I will be. From a analytical psychological point of view, i.e. depth psychology, what the heroic is kind of an adolescent archetype.
Interesting.
Archetype of I'm something special. I'm different. I'm going to break away from, my mother and my family and find, the ultimate. And, and I'm always kind of amazed that there are literally thousands of seminars in the world on leadership, but 0 seminars on how to be a good follower. Everybody wants to be the leader of their own life. Welcome to America, the ultimate California, ultimate of the individual. But Zhuangzi, the great Taoist sage, it is said, when his wife passed, he went into the kitchen and started banging on the pots and pans and hanging out in the kitchen. So I see it as a integration of, okay, the hero goes out and distinguishes himself. It's usually a him, not always. But at some point, you have to come home. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you wind up, 70 years old, still throwing rocks through windows, and the world is not fair, kind of stuff. So I see that integration. For me, it was moving from the cloud to the earth, not to disrespect or forget the heights, but to integrate the heights and the depths. And that's what happens. And of course, home is a metaphor, but it's also a home. And this is what is so powerful about figurative language and breaking through the barriers of dualism. To say this is a metaphor for something, you're still separate from it. But when you're home and you're cooking or answering the doorbell and God, comes into the room, then, you're right there. There's no symbolism. It is what it is. It is this very land is the lotus land of purity. This very stove is the throne of the Buddha. And that's, it's poetic, it's easy to say, but to do it, and especially someone like me, because that was not my predisposition. I was a flyer, as soon as I could, I left the nest, and, get me out of here was my mantra. But to recognize and be with the minutia, not as an inconvenience that I'd rather have a robot do it, but as that everything is really an offering to the divine. then, oh my, it literally completely transformed my notion of home. And yeah, so that's kind of the progression. And I see it, as the Western culture is interesting because, in the sense that one of the great myths of the West has been the Parsifal story, the Holy Grail. And Parsifal is the young knight, the hero, who goes out and seeks the great, the Grail, and he has all kinds of adventures as the hero does, and meets damsels in distress. But when he finally, runs into the old king, he doesn't get the fact that uh, that something more is needed than being enamored with this scene. Like, the king is wounded, and he never asks the question, "What's ailing you?" So he wakes up in the morning and it's all gone. And I think that's what adolescence is, that whether you're 4 or 14 or 24, you get this vision of the sublime. But you think, and this is what Robert Bly, the poet, used to call flying boys. Bly complained about the fact that since the war in Vietnam, the elder generation betrayed the younger, betrayed their children by lying, basically. So 20-year-olds had to become spiritual teachers because there was no elders who were holding that energy. And it's impossible. I mean, you get the vision, but you don't have the compassionate maturity to ask what's the problem, what's ailing you. So Parsifal has to go on this search to find the Grail Castle again. And the thing about this story that so impacts me is that this story has never been finished in our culture. It's still being written. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know. One of the great heroic ideals was progress. When I was a kid, I went to the World's Fair in New York, what's now where the Mets play, and General Electric had all the corporations had all their exhibits, and General Electric, the song, the jingle was, "There's a great big beautiful tomorrow," and our progress, we're gonna give it to you, and and you amplify that 1,000 times to these, no offense, but delusional people like Kurzweil, who says, "Oh yes, we'll computerize everything, we'll become immortal, we'll make our own Earth, we'll recreate." This is a classical, what Rudolf Steiner would call an Ahrimanic fantasy. This idea that me, by myself, I'm going to transform everything, as opposing to being cooked. Rumi says, the chickpeas in the pot, you're being cooked by the beloved. And sometimes it's damn painful, but there's something behind it. So I see that, at least for me, and I think many people, that the trajectory of the heroic has to do with coming back to the earth, coming back to a different relationship between genders and between humans and non-humans, and so on and so forth.
Beautiful, Rick. I think I can sort of bridge our investigation of the word hero with that, because I don't think they're at odds.
Okay.
Part of the exploration here is reclaiming that word.
Yes. Yeah.
And coming back to ourselves. I think maybe we've outsourced that ideal of the heroic to these promises of maybe progress, or the comic books, or this kind of, we've outsourced the mythic poetic.
Right.
And so it's really like when we say 10,000 heroes, is how can we bring some attention back to the heroism immediately in ourselves, in our experience. And from that side, more, it's what you say. I'm hearing this connection sort of to Joseph Campbell's ideal of the cycle, or the heroic myth, where coming home is sort of this essential part of that.
Yes. Yes, indeed. However, just FYI, or maybe not, there are a lot of people in the academy, and I kind of agree with them, who have taken Campbell to task
Yeah. Well, and
because he sees this as a monomyth, like there's one myth in all religions and all cultures,
yeah,
and in order to do that, you have to chop the head and the feet off of a lot of things that don't fit that monomyth.
yeah.
So I kind of like the idea of 10,000 heroes. It's not a singularity, it's a
Right.
plurality.
Yeah. So can you expand on that? How would you revise that monomyth
I
for today and
yeah,
how we apply? Because I mean, I think the essential thing about Campbell is to liberate that mythology and make it accessible and workable for ourselves. But what did he miss in your opinion?
well, I don't think he missed anything. He was just focusing on one bandwidth.
Yeah.
Campbell was a student of two people, of Heinrich Zimmer, the great German Indologist, where he learned all the Indian and Buddhist stuff, and then of James Joyce. And Joyce, who I consider a prophet, was like the first Westerner who he didn't tell, he showed how this guy, this working class guy walking around the street all day, is actually living out the Odyssey of Homer
Right.
unconsciously, but he's doing it.
And we're talking about the book Ulysses for
Yes. Yes.
anyone listening.
Now, here's an interesting thing about Joyce. So, his first, book Dubliners was like showing how, it's a nice word for saying how fucked up Dublin was. So he had to leave it.
I don't know, but I think he got it out, so I don't even we won't send you looking for that word.
The next book, Portrait of the Artist, was kind of his heroic claim. I'm going to be the great artist and create forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race.
Hmm.
By Ulysses, he's come down a bit. And at the end of Ulysses, Molly Bloom, the feminine, she has the last word. Like the earth has the last word. You can't just fly, close to the sun. You have to embrace humanity, embrace, and then Finnegan's Wake, which is, I did a tutorial on it when I was a student, but it's impossible to read. But it's written in the language of a dream, and it's like a multilinguistic, multicultural liberation from everything, from the hypnosis of the dream life, and from the illusion that I'm special. So the two main characters in Finnegan's Wake, Humphrey Chadwick Earwicker, who's a bartender, and Anna Livia Plurabelle, who's a laundress. By the end of the book, Humphrey Chadwick Earwicker is Here Comes Everybody, and Anna Livia Plurabelle is all the rivers in the world.
Hmm.
But what always struck me was that Joyce had a plan to write a fourth book, much simpler. It was going to be an ode to the sea. And it was supposed to be a book about grace, like after liberation, there's the grace. And he never got to write it. I mean, his mortal life was over.
Hmm.
So the heroic has big plans, but something about new embodiments of the heroic, multi-embodiments, not one particular myth. Hillman put it in an interesting way once when he was talking about the city. He said, if you have a good parks commissioner, if you have good waterworks, and so on and so forth, whoever the mayor is becomes less important.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking, I'm seeing a decentered. And I forgot if we shared this in some of our walks, but I have a friend who spent the summer with the Tlingit native tribe up in Pacific Northwest. I don't know if I mentioned it. And one day the Coast Guard came, a little boat, and they came because they were out of gas, and they wanted to know, they heard there was a gas station in the village, so they went around. Is there a gas station? Yes. Can I get gas? Well, we need to get the key to the gas cap. Well, who has the key? So they all have these fake Western names. So they said, well, John Robinson has it. So they go find John Robinson, and he said, well, I had it last week, but I gave it to Oliver Jones. And they go, Oliver Jones, well, I had it, 3 days ago, but I gave it to, Mary. Well, and it went on. And finally they gave up in disgust. They left. But I think that's a really instructive story in terms of the heroic, that the key keeps circulating.
Mm-hmm.
And not one monomyth that Campbell kind of championed, but another way to look at myth and the way myth incarnates in your life. It's your style. Goth black there, that's a mythic style.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody with horn rimmed glasses and a tweed jacket, that's a mythic style. And
Mm-hmm.
even people who say I have no myth and they go walk around naked, that's another mythic style. Like, you can't get out of the fact that whatever you're doing, you're under the aegis of a god. And God in quotes, archetype, whatever word you want to use. But my sense is an emerging health is a plural recognition of different embodiments of the heroic.
Uh-huh.
If you want a Renaissance man, if you want me to be well-rounded, I would have been a ball. And we all have things that we inherently do. That's our style. But unfortunately, the culture rewards certain styles and not others.
So much of this conversation keeps circling back, it seems like, to this aesthetic darshan.
Yeah.
And I remember a quote from Bruce Lee that stuck with me about artistry. He said, artistry is your craft combined with your sense of cool.
Oh, I like that. Wow. That's very cool.
But something similar in this, what you're saying, that there's an embodiment of our mythic and heroic, just in how we encounter ourselves in the world, how we see.
Yeah, and how we like stuff that as you said, like aesthetics are often considered irrelevant. So let's take something very simple, jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
For the contemporary consciousness, jewelry is an accoutrement, something extra, it's fancy, and but if you take the word, like a word like charm, for charm bracelet,
Mm-hmm.
comes from the Latin root carmen, which means song, but it also means a spell. So the root meaning of jewelry is it's a talisman. It has divine energy, and what you can almost tell a person's style or myth by their jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about that for me is it's not that I am this. It's like, this is the style I'm inhabiting at the time.
Mm. Is it a sense of playfulness there then?
Yeah, the Leela, it's total playfulness.
Yeah, so let me point at something I see as something, I guess, a problem, or something that's facing us as a society, is sort of a pervasive sense of irrelevance. So in one sense, that's what we're sort of shooting at here when we're talking about heroic. That I just, over the last several years, have noticed sort of a rising tide of just disenfranchisement, irrelevance, and how can I be a part of something that's significant? I see a lot of maybe the trouble or conflict coming from sort of that sort of paucity of significance in one's life.
Yeah.
Does this sense of play, of kind of trying on a hero or trying an aesthetic, coming into that encounter, do you think that might be an answer to that? Do you see that as something our listeners could apply, and how could they do it?
I don't think it's enough.
Yeah.
If you go back to the sense of irrelevance,
Yeah.
I would say it's stemming from the focus on the individual as all important.
Yeah.
And you go back to Sartre and the existentialists, after the war, they just saw there's no meaning, there's no purpose in religion, there's no purpose in society and government. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to invent my own life, and that's all I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but is it enough just to say fuck you to everything and everyone? I'm going to do my thing. I think what's missing in that is the value and the importance of connectedness.
Hmm.
That it's community, along with that heroic that makes it happen. I think what people are dramatically hungry for is this sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And way back when, I think in the 1950s or even late 1940s, the psychologist Erich Fromm, he perfectly articulated this in a book called Escape from Freedom. And he talked about the attraction of fascism and why people gravitated to Hitler and Mussolini. People like Joseph Campbell, by the way, they were all these people, Jung, Campbell, Iliade, they all flirted with fascism at one point, because it gave you something. You belong to a body, you belong to everybody.
Right.
But the problem is, you could not express your individuality, for fear of death. So the other side of the coin is Fritz Perls and the Gestalt therapy prayer. I do my thing, you do your thing. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you're not in this world to live up to mine. I go my way, you go your way. And if by chance we meet, it's beautiful. That was the Perls, the Gestalt therapy Bible. But again, I've seen that manifested in California at Esalen, and as like the pursuit of loneliness. I do my thing, okay, great, and that's why people are so desperate for how many hits can I get on my Facebook post, because I want to be seen, I want to be part of something. So I think the koan that's facing and been facing us in the West for a good century is, how can we integrate the heroic of individual freedom with the connectedness of the community of everything and everyone? That to me is the challenge.
I'm glad you boiled all that down to such a clear, concrete question. Do you have any propositions?
The only proposition I have is it's trial and error.
Uh-huh.
And the hero, this is the thing about the hero. Heroes are more often than not tragic, because they go places that are not approved of, where no one has gone before. In fact, there's a beautiful archetype in Japan and China. It was more in Japan. It was called the nobility of failure, where the minister knew that the king was going to kill him, but he's going to tell him the truth anyway, because it had to be done. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error. In the 60s, there were communes all over the world. Tennessee, Israel, China, and I would say 99% of them, quote, failed.
Why?
But I don't see them as failures. I see them as learning experiences. And we're trying to figure out ways that we can be together without respecting each other's calling and integrity, but still feeling connected as a whole. This comes to me, I don't know, this is completely, from a different realm, but there was a great basketball player named Larry Bird. And I always wondered, what made these people what they are, talking about heroic, what made a great sports person heroic. In fact, I once asked my publisher at Sounds True, Tammy Simon, do you think I could ever get access to these people and interview them? I don't think I could ever get access. And she said to me, oh yes, you could get access, but you'll be disappointed. He said, the same thing happened to me with folk singers. Larry Bird, I read his biography, And the moment that wedded him to basketball is he's 11 years old, and the 13 and 14-year-olds need somebody to play with them in a pickup game. And they ask him, can he play with them? So he plays with them. And of course, he excels, and it's amazing. But what did it for him was he got the approval and it's okay from these older people, from this community. He got to be cool. Because in order to be cool, you have to have someone acknowledge that you're cool. A lot of people think they're cool, and everyone else just thinks they're absolute flake eccentrics. But a few people are flake eccentrics who become cool, like David Bowie. And David Bowie, he did his thing cool, but it's because for one reason or another, it was acknowledged by a community. So I see those two bookends, the individual hero, somebody who jumps out of the pack and goes for something great, but also, not forgetting like where you come from and who you're really ultimately connected to.
You've done this repeatedly now, where you'll take something out right to the edge. God, is Rick really saying that we should be, acting in order to seek approval? But it's not that. It's somewhere right in the middle. But it's also not to forget that we're connected to something, to someone, to people.
If you're acting to seek approval, you're separate from your action. You're not heroic. You're doing it for a calculated payoff, which is the definition in a text like the Bhagavad Gita of what keeps you in karma, samsara, and illusion.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, but when you take the leap into the unknown and it's recognized that there's an alchemy there that brings people together. I was just, I don't know, we got into watching the series about the Grateful Dead here in this house. And it was so interesting because, people wanted Jerry to be the leader. He said, no, I'm not the leader. And he kept taking it to the edge. And the edge was the band and the audience are non-different. And that was unique until it wasn't anymore. Till, things caught up. But that's a really good question. And no.
Well, you brought it.
No.
Yeah, yes and no. And right as you were saying that, I was thinking, God, I was going to ask you, maybe you could dive in whatever you're willing to on the Bhagavad Gita, because this to me sort of stands out in the canon as like when we're talking about heroic action or just action itself or taking action in this life.
Well,
but for someone that's not just not even familiar with the title, how would you even begin to?
Bhagavad Gita means the song of God. And it's a little sliver of a tiny little sliver of a chapter in the great epic Mahabharata. It's not even like 2 pages of it. This epic is larger than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. But I rather than go into the Gita, I'd rather go into one of the terms of the Gita, or 2 of them, or 3. But the first one is dharma. Like and this will get into the approval issue, because dharma, which is arguably the great value of the Indian epic, is often misconstrued as doing one's duty. Do what you're told to do. Do what's appropriate. But what it actually means is when you do your dharma, it sustains the world. It means to hold up. It means to sustain. So it's not just I'm doing what I have to do or what I want to do. That what I do is helping to sustain the planet and the human race, and that makes it powerful. That makes it powerful. Now, there's in the other Indian epic, there's a strange conversation between 2 brothers. One has been exiled, and the other has been appointed to rule the kingdom. And the one who's been appointed wants the exiled brother to come back because he was exiled under not great circumstances. And there are these sages like sitting court, and he says, like, it's your dharma to come back. You must come back. You must rule this kingdom. And the sage, I think his name is Vishvamitra, which means the friend of the universe, friend of everyone. He says, indeed, Bharat, the younger brother, is right that Rama should come back and do his dharma, but higher than dharma is bhakti, or pure love, and bhakti trumps dharma. And the Gita moves the hero from the progression of being angry and upset because life isn't fair, to doing to understanding why he should do what he's supposed to do, and to 3, going beyond that and acting spontaneously out of bhakti, out of love. And what's beautiful to me about the word bhakti, it literally, the root of it means to share, budge. So it's not just I am love. Like, love can only be shared. But that's the progression. Arjuna, the hero, is moved by his teacher from being upset and angry to understanding a little bit about why things are the way they are, to even letting go of that and just acting out of the flow of love. And that's called lila, or play. When you're in karma, you're doing what has to be done because the circumstances compel you. In other words, you're working. The very same activity, if you have no self-interest, it's called lila. It's a play. And and that's the divine consciousness, that everything, whether you're cooking at home or keeping the books or leading the band, it's all a lila.
There's I really am enjoying how we're circling these themes so far, Rick. And I could feel like I could pull this all back to what you started with, the darshan of aesthetics, or the language, love and nature. And somehow in this, that we turn this action that we're taking, whatever heroic action we've assigned ourselves to, that we've chosen. There's a way, I'm familiar with this in my life, where I could take it on and it just is a total burden every step.
Right.
And look how busy I am, and look at everything I'm doing.
Right.
And sort of foment a certain type of resentment in myself.
Yeah.
So this thing about play, I heard 2 things in what you just said. So there's like the spirit of play in how we take action, and also like some line that we cross where, and again, just to bring it back to Campbell for the sake of this conversation, where that coming home you're talking about, and that cycle has to do with bringing the gifts back to the community.
Right.
So is there something in that, in I don't know, for lack of a better word, maybe you can reframe this or use a different word, but service, that somehow connects all this for us?
Yes, but everything depends on, from at least the Gita point of view, the consciousness of service. Because the Gita has a philosophical framework which is very much out of favor today, with neuroscience, with Buddhism, with all that. Because the Gita starts from the point of view that says, look, the reason you're doing stuff is because it's not because you want to, it's because you have to. You are compelled by nature to breathe, to eat, to work. And it takes it a step further. That nature, known as the gunas, is so subtle and all-pervading that different people have different natures that compel them to do different things. Now, the historical Buddha understood that. So when the thief came to him and said, I'm a thief, what can I do? I want to be awake, but I can't stop stealing. The Buddha did not tell him to stop stealing. He said, go ahead, keep stealing, but do it mindfully. Came back a couple of weeks later, I can't steal anymore. But you're compelled to act. So that's the first recognition, that what's called the mode, the qualities of nature compel everyone to act. And the illusion is that you think you're doing it. You think, I am a comedian, I am a scientist. All these I am identifications are actually part of the natural world, part of the disguise that you have identified with. So again, Krishna, like Buddha, like the great teachers, doesn't tell you to stop it. He just says, do it in a way that it's not self-interest, but it's in service.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds so cheesy, and do I'm good to others, blah, blah. But if you really think about, like, the constant refrain in the first third of the Gita is, if you act for the fruits of action, you're entangling yourself further in karma, illusion, all the rest of it. And when you fundamentally realize that any form of self-interest, even in the little scratch on the ass of the universe, even that little thing keeps you separate, keeps you out of the game, keeps you out of the Leela, because you think, then you realize it's not how do I beat this game? How do I succeed? But how do I attain the freedom to act not out of compulsion, but out of service and love? And the Gita offers the process to do that. Okay, first do it because you have to do it, but eventually it becomes what they call raganuga. It becomes an intensified passion. Like, this is my offer. This is the offering. Gyananand, one of my mentors, beautiful, wonderful yogi in the Himalayas, who was born in Switzerland, and at age 20 walked to India, told me he was at a bus stop one day in the Himalayas, and he ran into an American, very striking looking guy, and they struck up a conversation. And he asked this American, one of the flying boys, said, "What do you do?" What it's a Western question. What do you do? And he said, "I'm an ex-guru." He said, "Oh, very good. What do you do now?" And he said, "I follow my heart and I follow my desires." And Gyanananda said, "Very good. May I make a slight amendment to that?" And he said, "What's that?" He said, "Follow the heart and the desires." Subtle difference, but it's the difference between being free and being bound.
Just at the guest we just had on the previous episode referenced some saying. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just modern. But the next Buddha will be the Sangha.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, it just seems like this maybe is the emerging theme of this conversation. But
I think we have to.
We're sort of engaged in a heroic moment as a species. Would you say?
Absolutely. And again, the question is there going to be enough of a threshold of beings who can go beyond myopic self-interest?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be very careful about the next Buddha is the Sangha, because like everything else we've talked about today, it's yes and no. We need to have that community and feel it as a living, breathing, divine entity, but we cannot regress back into the Borg collective. Do you know the Borg collective? You might not be old
I
enough.
don't. I'm sorry. Can you?
Yeah, it's an old people's thing.
Enlighten me.
It's an ancient Star Trek episode.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Where there's a place in this solar system known as the Borg, and when you get near the planet or the soul, whatever it is, they say, "We are Borg. We will assimilate you." So it's the collective versus the individual. Mm-hmm. And I go back to this, that we need a Sangha that supports individual differences. And also, I would say perhaps the most heroic step that can be taken, and I don't know if anyone's capable of doing this. But can we function? Can we have functional communities that don't need an all-pervading, fearless leader, and that don't deteriorate a la American politics into cynicism, backbiting, and arguing? The reason I thought about that is when you said the Buddha and the Sangha, I thought of the Buddhist communities that fell apart in the 80s because of, various transgressions by the leaders. And it got so bad in some of them that they had to bring in psychologists and psychiatrists to try to take this all apart. And what the hell happened? And one of the things that happened was there were plenty of people who knew what was going on, but they didn't want to speak out because it would disturb the myth of the Sangha, and so it's really tough. It's a challenge that we're in, a real challenge. Can we have democratic communism? I don't know what to call it, but I do feel I'm not a macro person. Oshan is a good macro person. Thinking of economic systems. He's my son.
That's your son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm a micro person. I ask myself, like, what can I do? What's my relationship to this? And for me, it's, can I allow myself to be a democracy, not to be ruled by a singular image of who I think I am or who someone else thinks I am? And can we function in, as multi-dimensional heroic? The Dalai Lama, for fun, he fixes watches. That's not quite heroic. That's fun. But everything, it's all fun. So yeah, that's a real interesting question. And I don't like answers. I don't have answers. The questions are propelling. I'll say this much, because in a lot of the community efforts of the pre-millennium, which I was a part of, and a good example of that was a really, really integral, good person, M. Scott Peck, who was one early champions of community, the road less traveled, and all this stuff. But their concept of Sangha, or community, was just between people. How can we all live together in harmony? And the elephant in the room that's not being recognized is the earth. Like, we're in a community with the plants, and we're in a community with the mother and with the sea and the trees. And if that doesn't become part of our community, it's not going to work.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to press you for any answers. I
think about
I think we put our fingers on
these
a few
heroic
questions.
dudes who want to go off into space. We'll leave the Earth behind. We'll start a technotopia.
Yeah.
It's a deep type of poverty not to see and experience the incredible beauty that is around us and in us. And Ramakrishna, 11 years old, he's walks out of his house, sees a cloud floating in the sky, and it's so beautiful he faints. Now, who's had this experience lately? Robin Kimmerer, interesting person to interview. She wrote the book called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right.
Native American botanist. I went to a lecture of hers, and she put on the PowerPoint one slide, what do you call it? One projector, whatever it is, with like 50 corporate logos. And she asked us, how many can you recognize? And most of us could get like 80, 90%. Then she put on this, and the next slide, the next PowerPoint, 50 local plants. How many could we recognize? I think the average was like 2. this is the poverty and the lack of beauty, and it's amazing to me. Even maybe this will bring it back around. Hopefully, Akiba, who was the great mystical rabbi, who went on this journey with his three co-rabbi. They went on the inner journey to the Holy of Holies, and they succeeded at it. But when they came back, only Akiba lived. One of them killed himself. One of them went apostate. He denied any faith, and the other one went mad. So, as rabbis tend to do, they discussed for centuries now, what did he see that allowed him to survive? What was the great thing? And what they come up with was that what he saw in the Holy of Holies was this. He saw the trees, saw the grass. These other people were expecting, someone on a crown, sitting on a cloud. They had all these mental ideas. And Akiva, he made it. It's right here. And yeah. And as a result of that, he lobbied very strongly to keep the Song of Songs in the Bible. And some people read that, it's a love poetry. What is it doing in the Bible? Because it's beauty, it's love, and if that's not part of the heroic, that's where we get the violence. The imbalanced heroic of achievement and male dominance, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female. Rosen Briere, California healer extraordinaire, used to say that in 80% of the people she works on, male or female, their third chakra is off to the right, which in her lingo means they're operating out of a masculine will.
Ben, one thing I can maybe try to flesh out of this is that this idea of careening back and forth between some kind of collectivism that starts to become fascist,
right,
or oppressive, and then this other thing that's this self-interested, self-mythologized kind of
Marlboro Man.
adolescence, childish sort of thing that says. And I hear you, Rick, today offering this this idea of beauty, of just what we have here, this planet and this earth, maybe ourselves and our communities, as a path to that. And I know, like, love is can be such a complicated word to kind of kick around, but your proposal of beauty as a way to engage with play, to inspire us into action, as a way to find something a little more authentic, a little more honest with ourselves and with each other.
And that doesn't mean that we disengage from the other side of it. As when I met the master classical guitarist, Rainer Schillebrand, and plays like an angel. And my daughter was studying guitar. So I asked, she was 13, I asked her, go ask Rainer how he got so good. Maybe you'll learn something. And she said, nah. I said, why not? She says, I know what he's going to say. I said, what's he going to say? Practice. And when Rainer was here, even in the middle of everything he was doing, leading ceremony, he practices an hour a day. So it's these two sides of power and love that need to temper each other. In one hand is power, in one hand is love. That coming together, and we've all experienced one without the other. We see they don't work. They look like they're going to work, but then they don't. Yeah. So I'll just share one thing with you, because it's the Gita, and it's nothing that most people talk about it, but the Gita is about one person who awakens in the middle of a battle, and there's 640 million people supposedly who die in this battle. So only one, the hero, Arjuna, he understands why and wherefore. So a lot, the question is, what allowed Arjuna to receive the teaching of Krishna, of Bhagavan, Supreme? What allowed it? And he was the only one out of all these people, as they were going to war, he stopped and he asked, why are we doing this? Why am I killing myself going to work? Is my life about paying off my mortgage? Why are we doing this? Why are we eating stuff that kills people? Why are we putting stuff in our bodies? Arjuna asks why, and it hits him so deeply that he cannot function. And that gets the teaching. And I feel like the really great heroes that I have heard of or who have touched me, they're people who've gone through, and this is interesting. It's you don't just play out. It's what they've gone through the fire of ordeal. Nelson Mandela, how do you spend 27 years in a little cell without losing your will? And one of the things was that there was a myth that sustained him that said that the chief of the tribe has to go through the fire of ordeal. The other thing that sustained him, which I think you'd appreciate with all your work with the body and movement, is he was very conscious of posture. He would not let any of his people slouch in front of the guards. I heard this from a woman who went on a tour of his jail cell in South Africa. And the guy giving the tour was explaining all this, saying all this. It turned out that the man who gave the tour had been the guard. That's the heroic goes through that fire of ordeal. And Cass, you can't, like, one way to do it is do a Sundance and get hung up from a tree. That's a fire of ordeal. But people used to go to Nisargadatta, I am that, Maharaj, and ask him, Maharaji, should I do austerity? Should I go to the mountains? He said, no. He said, you don't have to do anything. He said, your life will do it for you. It's hard enough. Trungpa used to tell his people, he said, when you get pushed to the wall, what do you do? That's, to me, where the heroic emerges. When you get pushed to the wall, do you let the people go off to the concentration camp, or do you hide them in your basement? And I think anyone who flirts with the heroic and thinks, oh, I'm going to be special, I'm going to be, I want to be a shaman, you're cruising for a bruising, as my Volkswagen guru used to say, because you are going to get pushed to the wall. That's the deal. Arjuna, yes, he attains a state, but he does it by completely falling apart in the middle of a battle. And that falling apart pushes him to surrender, to give up his agenda.
So what about for folks that have that find themselves there now? Maybe brought on by some type of inquiry like this, like what's the point?
Yeah.
Find themselves in some paralysis or in the fire of ordeal.
Yeah.
Can you offer any words of guidance and or hope?
Yeah. I'll share a story and then something else. But the story is a little bit, maybe not quite on point, but I trust with the flash. I'd been in India and I had been involved with something that I was not proud of. And I walked into Gyanananda's hut. This guy has mentioned him. I just sat there staring at the ground, like moping, And he just looked at me and he simply said, that too is God's will. And it just took the burden off of me, oh, I've made nothing of myself. Oh, I've wrecked it. Oh, I'm this, oh, I'm that, like that self-judgment. So for me, the challenge is to really sink into the abyss and not try to get out till you've hit the bottom.
No easy way out then. No shortcut, rather.
Well, shortcut leads
No
to,
life hacks for the fire of ordeal.
yeah, yeah. And, we're in it. I had this experience. I couldn't, it was such a teaching. I was doing my class. I do a class, I think it was on dreams, visions, something like that. And we were having reading the Revelation of John, the Bible. And, Book of Revelations, end of the world, apocalypse. And we got back to the seminar, just like 12 of us. I said, well, how many of you felt this book really spoke to you? 2. The others, I'm not interested. I said, okay, what for you is the end of the world? I asked them. And to a person, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, they all said climate change. So we don't have to go looking for an apocalypse. Like, we're on the edge of it. We're in it. And I think people who feel that acutely are understandably disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And remember excuse me, there's it's making me remember a line from Bob Dylan, recreated by Jimi Hendrix, All Along the Watchtower, where he says, there are many here among us who think that life is but a joke. But you and I have been through that, and that is not our fate. I think my sense is, if you're feeling bored, if you're feeling useless, if you're feeling nothing matters, can you let yourself sink to the bottom of that and see what it wants you to do? Because if you get to the bottom, that's when vocation happens. We're too quick, to the 10-point program for success kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha, let's get back to him. He broke all the rules. And when he came back after his enlightenment, his colleagues saw him in Deer Park, and they were prepared to turn their back on him. He left their order. He left the asceticism. But when they saw him, they could not deny the vibration emanating from his being. And they understood that he had attained something. Yeah. What's that Pema Chodron title? The Wisdom of No Escape. That's how I experience it. So it's not just open to the beautiful and forget the ugly, but they do this dance, and allowing beauty, but also allowing anguish. The first noble truth is the truth of anguish in the Buddhist catechism, if you will. And if you haven't gone to that anguish, you're not in, you don't have the authenticity. So wherever you are, can you go to the end of it? Even the end of my poetry it's not that good. Go to the end of it. But I'm writing. This is what I'm writing, or however you experience that. That's my sense of it. It's kind of an initiation that Arjuna receives in the Gita, and a lot of people receive it through illness. A lot of people receive it through a breaking up of a relationship.
So what you're saying kind of reminds me of something that came up with a friend of mine recently. She had asked a group of us, how can I go from a anxious motivation to a love-based motivation? And for me, it felt like a false dilemma.
Right.
Because to put those are often put on a continuum, fear and love.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they're mutually exclusive. And something you're saying here is that maybe what you're afraid of is actually real. Maybe it's even worse than you could imagine.
Yeah.
And what would happen if you just confronted and embraced that reality? And what's
Yeah.
at the bottom, you said. I wonder if you could, you use the word vocation. And I think it just has a little bit more of an elevated context in the way you used it than maybe commonly, although I think it also implies that too. But I don't know if you'd be willing to unpack that a little bit.
You know, back to Dharma, I see vocation is simply the sense that you're in your right place at your right time. That whatever you're doing is what you're meant to be doing, and you do it so completely that it's done, takes you to the next Leela. So we have this, being called by God, what all that kind of stuff. But not to beat a dead horse, but it deserves to be beaten, that if the heroic is taking you out of the here and now, it's taking you further in time and space and creating more realities and more scenarios, and it'll never end. Whereas if your work is leading you into the present, the timeless, ever-present reality, it's making a contribution. And the shortcut is non-existent. It's not a long cut either. It's the like the humble awareness of where I'm at, which includes the anxiety. But can we open to the anxiety without being the judge of it? Who's the judge? I'm judging myself. I'm not good enough. I'm not, or I'm not good enough, or I'm the best. They both mean the same thing to me. Jerry Epstein, Kabbalistic healer extraordinaire, visionary teacher, wonderful ally of mine now in heaven, used to say that one of the signs of poverty, lack, want is the desire to be great. That's where I think the heroic gets neurotic. The desire to be great instead of the recognition that you're already great because you're made in the image and likeness of God. And carrying that space where you go.
Rick Jarow, thank you for your time. Whew. That was a conversation with Rick Jarow. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it and having this talk with Rick. For some links to some of these resources, he talks about some pretty obscure things. We're going to throw some links into the show notes. Make sure to check those out, and we'll see you next time.